Hello, everyone. Mike Schretter here from Stretz Takes. I'm joined again by Will Henshon. I had him back a couple weeks ago. We talked about the Celtics. Today we're talking about the NBA Finals. Will, thank you so much for coming back on.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Mike. It's great to be back.
Absolutely. Let's get into the NBA Finals, right? Obviously, as most people predicted, the Nuggets took control and won the series against the Miami Heat. And I just want to get your initial impressions of Game 5 or just the series generally. What were your initial kind of impressions of the series and Game 5?
Oh yeah, I think overall the series played out like a lot of people thought. I think that the Heat cooled down from three a little bit, which was going to happen. I talked about last time they just shot way above their expected value on the kind of threes that they took. And took a lot of open threes against the Celtics and made a lot of open threes. And those shots look easy when they're going in, but there's a reason why NBA defenses don't shut out every kind of those shots. Like they don't go in that often. So at some point, the Heat shooters were going to come down to earth. And Gabe Vincent had a tough series. Duncan Robinson actually played pretty well, I thought, but Strus had a really rough series. And it was just going to happen. And then offensively for the Nuggets and defensively for the Heat, I think Jokic just showed why he's the best offensive player on the planet. He just did such a good job against pretty much everything the Heat threw at him. One thing I thought that was really interesting is that in game two, the game the Heat won, they came back mostly because they threw like four different zones to the Nuggets throughout that fourth quarter where they came back, and the Nuggets just struggled to adjust to each of them. They started out with this kind of weird 3-2 look, then pivoted to a 1-3-1 matchup zone, and then finally kind of switched between a 2-3 and a man for the last couple of minutes of the game. And it seemed like the Nuggets just never really found their groove. It was really tough for Jokic to catch the ball where he wanted to and find ways to attack the zone. And then where the Heat won that game. And then the second quarter of game three, the Heat ran back to that same 1-3-1 matchup zone that worked really well in game two. And the second Jokic saw it, he found a spot kind of on the block extended. Brown back cut to the hoop was wide open because that's the kind of cut that zone's vulnerable to. And then Spoelstra instantly saw like that's not going to work. We have to keep pivoting. And that's kind of the microcosm of the series for me, where Jokic is just too good at recognizing that kind of thing. And you can throw a zone at him once and he might struggle to figure it out, but you cannot throw it at him a second or third time. And by the end of the series, that's what the Heat were trying, and it really just wasn't going to work.
Yeah, I would agree with you on a lot of those points. I think that one thing also with Jokic is within the man defense, he recognized when the Heat would make a run, a lot of times what would happen is, when the Heat would go up by one or make this like 8-0 run, they would give him the ball and he either would get an easy bucket in the post or he would hit some cutter or he would get Jamal Murray involved in an action. It's just his ability with that two-man game, with that dribble handoff series with Jamal Murray. Again, when they were blitzing those ball screens consistently too, I thought that was something that was really impressive about Jokic. I think that, what are your thoughts a little bit about Jamal Murray's performance? Because he had to really change his game compared to being the scorer. He became much of a facilitator in this series. And, again, what are your thoughts about the ability to be versatile and pivot your game a little bit to change that a little bit?
Oh yeah, I was really impressed with Murray in the series. I honestly was not that surprised by it, which I guess is kind of more impressive to me, at least. That like I'm like, of course Murray can change his game like that. Like he's a really skilled player, and I'm not sure if we'd seen it before or not. I honestly don't remember if he's had another series where he'd had to play like that. But I was just, I always felt like whenever he shot it, he was going to go in, and whenever he had the ball, he was going to make the right decision. I think earlier in his career, he sometimes got tunnel vision and started just chucking in tough spots. And this year in the playoffs, I've been really impressed with his decision making down the stretch of these games, where he kind of realizes, yeah, this step back three for me might be a pretty good shot, but if I make one more pass to Jokic, I'm going to get the same look, but with my defender off balance when I catch. And I'm really just watching a team like the Celtics where they really don't realize that. It's really night and day to watch the Nuggets and see how smooth their execution on offense and how all the players know if they pass it, they're going to get the ball back in a better spot.
Well, I think again, obviously us being guys who love the game and play basketball and stuff like that, like the team-based game is just something that is just so refreshing to watch. And I think that, that's something the Celtics can learn from a little bit. I mean, again, obviously the Celtics are going to hopefully find maybe some point guard that can really orchestrate the offense a little bit better, hopefully, like a downhill guard that we kind of talked about last time. But I think that one thing that I liked about the Nuggets is it wasn't just Jamal Murray and Jokic. Yes, they generate a lot of the offense. Yes, they kind of every set's for them to score, but I want to talk about, guys like Bruce Brown and Aaron Gordon. Michael Porter Jr. played well in game 5, but he had his struggles, but like that shows mental toughness. But Aaron Gordon going from a guy who was the 4th pick in the draft back in 2014 or 15, whatever it was.
Yeah, one
And
of the
then,
two.
yeah. And then like being able to change his game to being able to be like a viable third option. A guy who can shut down a really good player in Jimmy Butler. Talk about like, the importance of those role players. And, where from Miami, it was kind of, a lack of showing from that those great role players that burned Boston so much.
Yes, I think that Denver has a really great situation for guys like that, in that, all those guys can play within their roles and they all are willing to accept their roles. And it's really a two-way thing where, Denver, their offense got to a place where they saw like all these guys can cut to the basket, especially in Bruce Brown and Christian Brown's case, or just be spot up shooters, which is more the case for Porter Jr. And then somewhere in between for Gordon, where he can, get some post ups, but is also a lot of a slasher off ball. And I've just been really impressed by, all of them just accepting that, doing a really good job in those roles. And, you know, Jokic and Murray are good enough that those guys really don't have to do that much outside of those roles. And I think that's something that we saw with the Heat. Duncan Robinson trying to put the ball on the ground a little more this series because the Heat were out of answers at times on offense. And, he's not that guy. He's a great spot up shooter. He's a great cutting off the ball. But once he has to put the ball on the deck for more than a dribble, it's bad things are going to happen with their offense. And, same thing. Gabe Vincent is great, when teams are dropping those screens, when he can step into threes. But once he's trying to, slash to the rim and make decisions in the air, it gets a lot sketchier. And it's same across the board. You can go through Heat guys like Strus, another one. Once he has to start making decisions on the ball and can't just, make one read or shoot, it starts to get really sketchy. And, that's because he just don't have as much firepower on top. They have Jimmy Butler. And then in terms of guys who can create their own shot, that's more or less it. When threes are going in, everything looks great. And that's what we saw in the Bucks series. That's what we saw in the Celtics series. But once the threes stop falling, then you end up with a team where the engine, Jimmy Butler, is, not nearly as good as Jokic, just in any sense on offense. And then the rest of the team has guys who are very limited. And, those limitations can, sometimes run into issues when you get into a series like this where you run out of gas.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think something else too is just with Denver, they're arguably the biggest team in the league. So again, when they're able to be effective in that drop, because Jokic is really good at like deflecting passes and stuff like that. It's tough when you're shooting over Porter Jr. 6'10, Gordon 6'9, KCP 6'5, Christian Brown 6'6. It's just a lot of size to throw at you. And I think pivoting over to Miami, I look like obviously they got beaten pretty bad in this series in terms of point differential, right? Especially but I think people expected that. But I think it's still a magical run, and I still think for me it's funny. I'm kind of a minority on this, but I didn't think it was like after they beat the Bucks. I thought that was a surprise, but I wasn't surprised that Miami was like a contender. If you asked me before the season, I would have put them in that category. They just didn't. They weren't healthy, and they didn't unfortunately play up to par. They didn't shoot the ball very well. Right. So I think that was something that, is important. But I guess going into next year, who do you look at outside of maybe Denver as viable contenders? I mean, do you think that, the Celtics are in that mode still again? What do you think about the Suns? What do you think about the Bucks, the Heat, teams like that? I mean, I still think that the Heat are contenders. I still think the Celtics are contenders. The Bucks, I think the Suns are, but they need to get their pieces together. So that was a kind of soliloquy, but I'd like to hear what your contenders are for next year. You don't have to give me a list, but like it's kind of like some teams you're thinking about.
Oh yeah, honestly, I came away from this playoffs thinking is that there are way more contenders than we think there are. I think that most of this, there's probably 8 or 10 teams who, if they get caught shooting the playoffs next year and really find guys who figure out their roles by the end of the season, then they could get hot and go to the title. I know that in the West, just kind of flipping through playoff teams, the Nuggets are obviously a contender coming back. The Suns are obviously a contender. Clippers, I'm not sure we're ever going to see them healthy. If they are, I guess so, but the ship may have sailed on that one. I think the Lakers could come back and make another run similar to this year. And you just keep going on down the list. And I think the top 4 teams in the East the same way, where I think the Cavs are going to take a leap this year. I think the Celtics and Heat will be right back where they were. Maybe not in that same matchup again, but in terms of where they'll be in the playoffs. I do think that the Nuggets should just be the favorite because of what they've proven right now. They just have the best player in the league, and until somebody shows that they can kind of execute as smoothly and have as many guys who are going to play great in their roles next to that guy, I don't see any reason to choose anyone else. I think the Bucks are kind of in a weird spot right now where they have to really figure out if this formula is going to work with Giannis, Middleton, and Drew, and then kind of a bunch of role players who may not be good enough, especially if they can't find a way to bring Lopez back with the new cap rules. And they're the only ones who have a player who's close to as good as Jokic. I think that Curry and Luka are kind of close to that, but one of them's still on the way up, one of them's on the way down. Tatum isn't consistent enough. Embiid, who knows if he's going to be healthy in the playoffs or if he's going to perform in the playoffs. So I would say, Bucks and Nuggets would be my two contenders if I had to pick two. But I honestly think coming into the year, they're going to be 8, 9, 10 teams who all have a chance to win a title.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've always been interested in. Is I think the NBA, I think it's shifting in terms of an era, right? I think super teams are still going to be there. I'm not saying they won't, but it's in the idea of building around, one superstar, one good star, and then like having really good ancillary pieces that understand their roles and can fit. I think that's something like where the Heat really did that well because like, Jimmy Butler's that, has proven to be in the playoffs, at least, an upper tier star. You got Bam kind of, Bam can be a star. He's just, I think he's a little too inconsistent, but, he had his moments. And then you have, ancillary pieces and you look at kind of the ideas of the Nuggets are the perfect example of that, right? Because, again, Jokic is a really unselfish player, but I just think it's really funny, again, at the end of the day, where people still think that Embiid, isn't that same level. It's not because I don't think Embiid's a great player, but it's just like his playoff numbers just don't indicate that. I mean, even Doc Rivers said it on the Bill Simmons podcast the other day, where he was saying it was more health, but he was like, you look at Embiid's numbers in the regular season, he averages like 35, and the playoffs, he averages like 24. So that's actually a question I want to ask you. If Embiid wants to get to the level that Jokic has been, because Jokic is clearly proven to be the best player now in the league, what does he have to do? For me, I would say stay healthy and learn how to get his teammates involved and make quicker decisions. But I'd like to hear what you think because, again, these are two of the best bigs in the game, and I'd like to see Embiid take the next step.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. I was about to say I was going to say the exact same thing where I think that Jokic, or sorry, not Jokic, Embiid really just needs to be able to handle having a double run at him in the playoffs. I think it's been 4 or 5 years in a row now where once you get late in these playoff series, teams kind of realize, hey, if we just run a double at Embiid, a lot of times he's not going to make the decision fast enough to punish you. And you end up with a turnover, some bad fadeaway when he panics. And that just happens over and over again. I think that the stuff that was going on defensively late in the series with the Celtics, where really in game 7, Tatum just hunted him out on switches over and over again, that's a little less sustainable because Tatum hit a lot of tough shots on that. And, that could happen to any big in the league. I think if teams could have done that to Jokic and it would have looked just as bad, it's just that nobody got that hot shooting tough shots like that against Jokic this playoffs. I think that defensively, Embiid will figure it out, and they'll run some more adjustments. They'll try some new things, and he might get burned for a game or two. That's the life of a big in the modern NBA. But he's a defensive anchor, and that I'm not concerned about. But on offense, he really needs to just work on getting the ball out quicker because if he can move the ball a lot faster and maybe get it back on the second catch like Jokic does a lot of the time, then it's just much harder to guard. And they have all these great shooters on their team right now. Philly has a lot of great players who really could fill roles similar to what Denver had. And if Embiid's not going to get the ball out fast enough like Jokic does, their talents are really wasted.
Going to Philly, actually, yeah, because this is a team that people are looking at as contenders because they got Nick Nurse, who's a great coach. I think I think I have all the respect in the world for Doc Rivers. I don't think he's a bad coach. I just think that Nick Nurse is a guy that can come in and make better adjustments. He's just proven to do that in Toronto. His press conference was a little interesting. Obviously, I didn't think he did a bad job as people think he did, but it was more, again, I'm not sure how he and Harden fit just because of the way he typically plays. I think he's going to try and expand Maxi's potential. I think that's the way I would go with it because I think Harden slows everything down. The Sixers need to play faster. And I think they need Maxi to do that. But it's interesting because I was thinking about this a little bit when we were talking about it because you think about the growth of guys like Jamal Murray with Jokic, I think that Embiid and Maxi could have that potential together more so than like a Harden and Embiid, just because I think that they're both just a little too ball dominant, a little too slow paced. Harden's a great passer, but again, he doesn't have that burst like he used to, even though he's a good player. And I'm not sure how Harden really wants to be there. So if you're in Nick Nurse's shoes, if you're looking at the Sixers, because this is a team that people think can contend, what do you need to make the adjustment wise with this team to maximize not just Embiid, but the pieces around him to make this team not always flame out in the second round of the playoffs?
Oh yeah, so I actually think I'm in the minority here, where I think that Doc Rivers actually did a really good job with the Sixers this season. I think that regular season, especially, he was just really great at building a system that allowed Embiid to win the MVP. Like people act like it was a fake MVP because of what happened in the playoffs, but that was a real MVP. He averaged 33 points for the year, was the best player in the league pretty much the whole season. I get Jokic did take a lot of regular seasons and games off, and that's partially why Embiid won, but also Embiid won because he was awesome. And I think in the playoffs, the Sixers tried a lot of different stuff. They went through all these different defensive coverages in the Celtic series. They tried all kinds of stuff to get Embiid the ball in different spots. And I think it really just comes down to, can Embiid make the decisions? I think they're fast enough. We talk about Maxey and Harden, but I think that both of them were good enough to be kind of the 2B. And, if you have two guys who are the 2B, that's probably enough. And I just look at it that you're only as good as your best guy in the NBA playoffs. And until Embiid really makes that next step and can be a facilitator in addition to a scorer and a defensive anchor and a rebounder, they're really just going to struggle. I think maybe, Maxey could take another leap and become a guy who can take over for a series like Murray. But until that happens, I mean, it really just comes down to Embiid. And there's really no guarantee that Maxey's going to take that leap. He's already like far exceeded expectations based on what we thought he was coming into the league, where he was in the draft. And I think he's still only 22, 23. It could be 3-4 years before he takes another leap. And that's going to be beyond the time where Embiid's window is pretty much closed. So I think we really just need to look at this as an Embiid team more than a Maxey or Harden team, because that's really what the ceiling comes down to.
Yeah, no, I mean, those are definitely fair points. I think that another team to kind of look at here is the Suns, right? And everyone's talking about them. When you turn on any show, it's the Suns are gonna win the West, and I think their two stars weren't good enough to beat the Nuggets. I'm not saying they aren't good enough to win an NBA championship. They just didn't have enough, right? And Devin Booker was awesome in the playoffs. I mean, Game 6 was a tough one for him, but he was excellent for that series basically up until that point. I mean, he was arguably playing like one of the best players in the league. I mean, just he looked, at some points I literally thought I was watching Kobe because he was just the way he was shooting the mid range. Now, the one thing about him is, again, in those big crucial moments that they have gotten blown out in 2 games at home in closeout games, to Luka and then Jokic. And I think the thing with Frank Vogel I like is that he's going to bring a championship experience. I don't think Monty Williams was the problem there, but I do think the team got a little stagnant. And I think that making a change maybe can make them a better defensive team. But the issue with the Suns at the end of the day is they don't have enough depth. And DeAndre Ayton is just, I don't know how willing he is to want to play defense and play basketball. I mean, what Jokic did to him, I understand Jokic is unbelievable, but that was embarrassing. I mean, Jokic scored him in any Jock Landale played better defense than DeAndre Ayton did. So I think that for the Suns is the problem. It's, I think that, Max Ishbia and, James Jones are going to try their best to build, a team around him. But if DeAndre Ayton's not going to be willing to play defense to be a defensive anchor, this team's only going to be as good as that. And, there's going to be a team that can score a lot of points, but they'll play Denver again, and Denver will beat them because Denver's, guys who are willing to do that. And I think that's the problem I see with Phoenix.
Oh yeah, I have similar thoughts about Phoenix. I think that this year's loss to the Nuggets, honestly, I'm less concerned about. I think that last year's loss to the Mavs was really bad, but it's a full different team. They're not a full different team, but it's enough of a different team with KD that I feel like that stink is kind of gone. And this year they lost to a team that just had similar talent up top and just a lot more depth. I think that with another offseason to really move around some pieces, I was going to say hopefully including DeAndre Ayton for their sake, because I just think that relationship is kind of broken at this point. They'll have a chance to really fortify around KD and Booker and get to the point where they're another one of these teams where if they stay healthy, they're going to win a championship or at least be right there. I think that, those two guys are maybe the best 2-player combo in the league, arguably including Jokic and Murray. And they just had pretty much no help alongside them this year. And, KD is someone who I don't know if you can ever count on him to stay healthy for a full season, which is going to be an issue for them. But I don't have a whole lot of concern with their team, assuming they can either get Ayton to play, which I think is less likely. I think he needs a change of scenery at this point and really a spot where he can rebuild his confidence with less pressure. But assuming they can, trade him and bring back guys, say, I don't know, Brooke Lopez, maybe not him specifically, but somebody like him, or maybe Miles Turner, and just guys who are going to fill roles more like we saw out of Denver. They're another team that I look at and just say, hey, they're good enough to win a championship, assuming they can stay healthy.
I actually, I mean, if that were to happen, I think Brooke Lopez would be a great fit in Phoenix because he kind of fits the need that they need. I mean, I just kind of played out, I just repeated the same word, but I think that's something that I think is important because again, with Durant and Booker, you're gonna get scoring. But going with Suns a little bit, what do you think? Where do you think Chris Paul's gonna end up? Do you think Phoenix is the best place for him? Do you think he should be in talks with going to the Celtics, which I don't know how that would happen, but or the Lakers or something like that? I just think with me, I just don't know where Chris Paul's going to end up. I just think that at the end of the day, I know Phoenix shoots so many mid-range jump shots and doesn't really attack the basket, and Chris Paul would kind of add into that. But is he really going to do any better with the Lakers? I don't know. At this stage in his career, and because LeBron really facilitates a lot of the offense with Austin Reeves and those guys. I mean, I don't know with that. I just think Phoenix might be the right place for him, but playing more limited minutes, have Booker have the ball in his hands a little bit more might be the better option. But what are your thoughts about Chris Paul and maybe potentially what this whole situation is? I just think it's a lot of it's just confusing at this point and it needs to be solved.
Oh yeah, so I don't really understand the move from Phoenix's point of view. If they need to move him, I guess it's a money thing, but I just don't think they're going to bring back better options at point guard. And at some point, money is money, and you just want to get the best player you can. And I'm pretty sure Ishbia is not going to make decisions in terms of luxury tax. I think that Lakers makes no sense for either party for Chris Paul. I think that the Lakers' whole identity that they really found the second half of the year was that we're going to be really athletic and really good defensively and just have enough offense between LeBron and AD at times and Austin Reeves at times that they're just going to piece it together and just have the defense be good enough. And Chris Paul at this point in his career is not a great defender. He was a former all defensive guy, but at this point he's small and old, and that's not really a great combo. I'm not saying he's going to get picked on, but if you compare to other guys on the Lakers team, he would get picked on. I think Celtics would make a lot of sense for Chris Paul. We talked about the need for kind of a really true point guard in the Celtics team last time. And I actually floated Chris Paul before we knew there was any chance he would get moved. If he does get waived, which seems unlikely, that would make sense. I don't know if he'd want to go to Boston. One trade that I kind of floated out that I still don't know, I haven't put it in the trade machine, is Al Horford for Chris Paul, because I think that fills needs for both teams. The thing about that is that I don't know culture wise if Celtics feel like they can do that, because Al Horford's really been a vital part of building this culture post kind of the stink of Kyrie and that weird bubble year, or the weird post bubble year, excuse me, where they just sucked. So I think that, if there is a trade, maybe that would be that, but it's a little sketchy. Otherwise, I'd like to see Chris Paul in a situation somewhere, maybe like Cleveland. I guess Cleveland wouldn't be a good fit because they already have good guards, but in some situation more like that, where it's a younger team where he's really the older guy who's really holding everything together. And that's really what the Celtics situation would be. Because I think that's really where his skill set would be most valuable, where he can really show his skills as a true point guard and not be in a situation where he's being depended on to be defensive. It would really be a great defensive player, because next to LeBron and AD, I think that's kind of what they need from him.
All right. Last thing, Damian Lillard, right? Who knows what's going to happen there? But I'm of the mindset that if the best fit for him, at least contract wise, would probably be the Heat. Now, look, I think he would fit great on the Celtics. I really would. But they would have to give up someone worthy money wise for him, right? So it just is that Jaylen Brown. And we talked about this last time. Like, it's just, I don't think Jaylen Brown is the problem with the Celtics. I don't. I think it's their lack of, coaching experience, where I think Joe Mazzulla, I don't think he did a bad job, but again, he needs another year under his belt. I think the new hire at assistant coach is going to be very helpful. The lead assistant, I'm blanking on his name right now. Yes, there we go. So I think that's something that I like, but I think in terms of what the Heat need, Damian Lillard fits perfect because I think he fits well with that system because you can run him off dribble handoffs all day long, and it takes less pressure off of Jimmy Butler to score 30 every night, which, Jimmy Butler is capable of that, but he runs out of gas. And I think that's something that, especially because he's not a lethal 3-point shooter, you need a guy that's going to be able to extend the defense a little bit. And I think Lillard would be fit great there. But what are your thoughts about Damian Lillard? Do you think he moves on from Portland? It sounds like it's going to be, there's a potential for it. But, unfortunately, a lot of things get, there's a potential of it, then they don't actually happen. Right. So I'd like to hear what your thoughts on as we wrap up the show right here.
Oh yeah, so with Lillard, I think that kind of the safe bet with him is always to just say he's not going to move. Just it's felt like that the last 5 years where there's been buzz about it, and he just hasn't moved. If he does, I think that in terms of where he would want to go, it definitely seems like the Heat. Everyone wants to go to the Heat. Everyone loves it there. Who goes there? But I just don't think they have the assets to get him back. I don't think they have very many first rounders available to trade. I think it's only one or two. And then you're saying, two first rounders, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson. I don't think that's going to move the needle. One trade that I do think is really interesting would be Tyrese Maxey, Tobias Harris, and three or four firsts. Because I think that you get into a situation where Philly gets to a point where you're not only as good as Embiid, you're as good as Embiid and Lillard, and that's another of these great duos that you build a few role players around them, and all of a sudden you have another team that looks a lot like Denver. And I think that someone like Lillard next to Embiid would really be a way to unlock him because he'd be really in a situation where he'd have somebody who can score and facilitate next to him. And right now he kind of has Maxey who can score and Harden who can facilitate, but nobody who can truly do both. And I think that, adding another true superstar next to him would really unlock parts of his game in a way that really improving himself would do. But, that way you don't have to depend on Embiid solely getting better over time because who knows, he may have peaked at this point. He's already a really great player and it's hard to add that much more to your game. And, Lillard would be an awesome fit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've always, it's more that I was obviously going to Miami because that's where he said he would be fine going. But, Brooklyn, I mean, I just don't think that's something. I mean, maybe they could, get rid of a bunch of their assets to get them, but Brooklyn looks like they're moving in the direction of trying to get their team young, build those guys, and then figure that out. But Philly would be interesting if that were to happen because, like you said, I mean, Lillard's a pretty I mean, Lillard is, I understand he's a little ball dominant, but like Lillard's a pretty unselfish guy. He's not hard to play with, I would say, based on what I've seen in Portland. He seems like a very good teammate. I mean, a guy that definitely cares about winning. And again, look, he's dealt with a lot of craziness and I would say a lack of success in Portland in the last couple of years. And I wouldn't say that's all his fault. I mean, again, he's not a great defender, but I think that's partially why their defense has been where it is. But offensively, he's not been the issue there. I mean, he's been putting up the numbers that we're accustomed to seeing. It's just he plays in Portland. No one really watches Portland games, and you play in a Philly market or a Miami market, you have a chance to elevate your status. But again, he's so loyal and he hates super teams. It'll be really interesting to see if he actually would want to do that. But, if he does play for Philly, that would be a very interesting situation. I wouldn't jump to saying they're an NBA championship. Like they're automatically going to win the championship, but they would obviously, they'd still be a better contender than they are now. But, again, I think that it's going to be really interesting. I mean, you see Bradley Beal is potentially going to move and, who knows about that because Bradley Beal's been on that market for a couple of years. So it's a lot of interesting stuff, but I want to thank you again. It's always a pleasure having you on. I always learn something new, I would say, when I get on a podcast. So with definitely you bring a lot of good basketball knowledge. So appreciate you as always coming on.
And thank you so much for having me, Mike. I had a lot of fun and love to come on again.
Oh, absolutely. We'll probably get into, when we get some time, we'll probably get into some NBA draft stuff too. There's a whole host of things I want to talk about there too. So we'll definitely get into it, but thank you again. And, I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you too. Talk to you soon.
All right. That's Shred's Takes. Will Henshon, Mike Schretter. Have a good one, everybody.